page and opening the beginner project. Welcome back to our Construct 3 tutorial series. In the last video, we went over what Construct is, the advantages and disadvantages of it versus other game frameworks. We loaded up Construct itself and we went over some of the templates, including the Ghost Shooter template, and we opened up the source code for the Ghost Shooter. So in this video, we're going to do a tour of the system in terms of what everything on the screen here that you see is exactly. And the best way to learn a new technology is to start playing with the examples that they give us. So this is going to be a lot of information, but that's the benefit of the video itself versus traditional class talks. You can take notes if you want to, but feel free to rewind, pause, or restart the video if you need to. I'm going to be going fairly quickly, so I recommend that you follow along with everything that I'll be doing step by step. Pause the video as you get to the next step and make sure that we're doing similar things at least. If you want to do things in a different color, that's fine by me. If you ever run into any issues, you can always press Control Z to undo things that you did on the screen and Control Y to redo what you did on the screen. So if you do get ahead, you can always go back if something is not quite the same or not quite right, and ultimately, if things are indistinguishable from my screen, you can always reload the game by going back to the start page and opening the beginner project example again, and that will open up a brand new instance of that project. So, what is everything that's on the screen? First off, we have our menu at the top bar here. I already went over that a little bit in that we have our start page, we have layout 1, so this is our actual space shooter demo. We have event sheet. I'll go over exactly what this is in the next video and what everything on this page does. And we have our current account right here. We don't have an account, so we're just a guest right now. Additionally, we have our play button, so if we want to preview the game, we can just click this preview button at any point in time, and we can make this maximum size if we want, and we can start playing the game and shooting some monsters. In the menu itself, we have project, including save and save as, so you can save your current project onto your own computer, or you can save it in the cloud if that's where you want to put it. We have our preview button as well as remote preview if you want to share your game with friends while you're editing the game. We have our export tool to be able to put this project on a platform like Kongregate. And we also have the open tools if we need to open the file from our own machine. And open recent tools so that we can open files that we worked on in the past. We also have view, so we can add additional views, but we're fine with what we have for now, as well as the add-on manager, so we can get additional add-ons for the game and we can add more functionality. If there's something that you feel that you need that seems like it would be really common, sometimes you can go to the add-on store to get it. And the Skira store, so the Skira store, you do have to pay for stuff on this store, and that includes things like assets and music and different effects. Although there is a site that I'll be showing you where you can get assets, including images and icons and music and sounds, different fonts, so that you can implement these in your game if you're not an artist. Personally, I'm not a great artist myself. I'm more of a programmer and a logic-based person, so I'll be grabbing all the assets from a place called Open Game Dev, and I'll show you how to get that in the next video. Next up, we have settings, so we can change things like the language, different UI modes, so it automatically chooses desktop for me because I'm working on my desktop. Font sizes, if you're having issues reading the screen, as well as different themes that we have available. So dark and light, I'll leave it on the default for now so that there's no confusion, as well as different things that we can enable and disable. So the project tab is where we're going to have all of our assets and all of our logic stored. So It has a fairly strict way that it wants you to define some of these guys. So you'll always find object types within the object types folder. You'll always find your event sheets, so all the logic behind your system in the event sheets folder, and your layouts. So that's what your level design looks like, is going to be in the layouts folder. Just below the project tab is the layers tab. So here we can see the different layers of our game that we can put on top of each other. So for example, the main layer is where all the game logic is, and the UI layer is where all of the top facing things are, like the score and the game over text. So we can see exactly what's in that layer by disabling it, and you can see on the screen that we're hiding and showing the specific UI layer. And the main layer is the game itself. So we're enabling and disabling it. You can see that it's toggling its visibility. The next thing I want to introduce to you is the coordinate system. So in any game development framework, you'll have a coordinate system in terms of where everything is placed on the screen. So a coordinate is just a combination of two values, your x and your y. So your x value is going to be where it's placed on the screen in terms of the horizontal value, and the y value is where it's placed on the screen in terms of the vertical value. So you can think of it as just being a whole bunch of little tiny boxes. Those boxes are called pixels, and each pixel can be represented by a coordinate. So when my mouse moves over each individual pixel, you can see on the bottom that the coordinate is moving. So at the very top left here, I have the coordinate of 0 and 0. If I can get my mouse on top of there. There we go. So 0 and 0. And then as I move my mouse further and further to the right, you can see here that the x, or the first value, is increasing. So it's going all the way up in the world coordinates, all the way up until 1279. And then we can get lower, and then the y value is increasing. So we're going up to 700, 800, 900, and 1020, 1030. Somewhere around there is what the size of our world is itself. So you'll notice here that there's monsters on the bottom right hand side of the screen, but when we start the game, they don't actually show on the screen until they start walking towards you. That's because if you see this dashed line here, that's where the camera is placed. So the camera is what everything that's being put onto the screen that's being shown to the user. So then we can have really, really big levels, but only focus on the parts that we need to focus on, like our character. Our camera then follows our character around on the screen as he's shooting the monsters, but the camera is locked to the world so that we can't leave the world itself. So you can see here we also have a background object, we have a monster object here, we have our player character, we have our bullets, we have our explosions, etc. Note that if you accidentally move anything around here on the screen, then we can just press Ctrl Z and you'll be able to go back to the original state of the game. So let's get started actually editing the game itself. So you can see here it says game over, press space to restart. Well, we can edit this text and say you died, and then hit OK, and then we can hit the play button here, and I'll just pull it onto the screen. And then when we ultimately die here, it says you died, press space to restart. So now we're editing the game itself. We can also edit that text by clicking on the game over text here, and it will highlight that instance itself, and we can edit it just in the bottom left here in the properties tab. So this is what I want to go over next. So I'll go over it for the character, but we can't select the character right now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide the UI by unchecking that specific layer. So now both of those things are invisible, and we can select our player object itself. First off, I want to bring you over to the properties side of the screen right here. So the properties screen is where we're going to define a lot of the functionality for specific object types. So for example, this object type is called player. It's not a global object type, and it has the plugin sprite. So all of the object types that we have in the game have plugins that define its functionality. So a sprite, for example, is just a image, or you can also call an image a sprite that's drawn on the screen that might have specific behaviors. It's going to have coordinates in terms of where it's drawn on the screen, a size, so we can scale it up and we can scale it down. I'll undo that. It'll have an angle, so we can rotate that object, and you can see on the left side here it's changing the angle. And as we change stuff in here, it'll also change it over here. I'll just undo that again. We can also set the opacity, so that's how transparent it is or how invisible it is. We can change the value of this to something like 20% if we wanted to make our character invisible. So he's almost visible there. We can increase it to make himself a little bit more visible. There we go. So now he can kind of be see-through and we can see objects and stuff through him, but we'll leave it at 100% for now. Next up is the color. This doesn't really matter for sprites because we have an image being drawn, but for other object types it will. Next up we have the layer tab. So this is the layer that that object is being drawn onto. So we have main here, and that means it's being drawn onto the main layer. And we have the UI layer as well. So if we wanted to, we could move it onto the UI layer, and the character would then be considered a part of the UI, but we want to leave the player as part of the game, so we'll leave it on main. Z elevation is how far away the object is from you and relative to other objects on the screen. So if I move it on top of this guy, you'll notice that it's actually behind him, behind the monster. So we can increase the Z elevation to something like 1, and then he goes on top of the monster. We leave it at 0. He'll still stay on top of the monster because they have the same value. So we'll just want to put this on 1, and then the monster will then stay on top of the player itself. For the most part, you don't have to worry about the Z elevation, but it is useful to know sometimes if you're curious why some things are on top of each other and then some things aren't, even though you're moving it on top of each other. So we'll put the player back in the center of the camera here. Remember that the camera is denoted by the dashed lines. So you'll note that the object on the screen and the object under the project tab isn't quite the same object. So this is an instance of the object, and this is an object type. I'll go a little bit over the differences between object types and object instances. So object types are an essential part of game design and Construct 2. Object types define a class of an object. So for example, a player or a monster could be different object types of the sprite plugin, like I talked about up here. They have different animations, they have different kind of events that can be applied separately to them, and they look and they act differently, despite the fact that they are both sprite objects. We can actually create multiple players by dragging the player into the game, and now we have multiple player object instances. So the difference between object types and instances is very important when you start editing them, because you can edit this individual object and this individual object, but note that they have different properties on the top left-hand side here. So for example, this one is at 106.202 in terms of the coordinates, and then this one is at 398.185. So then when we go into the object type, you'll note that the position is empty and max speed says multiple because we have multiple different max speeds in here. If we then click on this player, it goes back to 200 and then it gives us the position and gives us the position and 500 for the max speed here. So if we go ahead and hit play, you'll notice that we have some interesting behavior here because we have 2 players on the screen and they're both being controlled with the same arrow keys. So that's not something that we want, so we'll go ahead and delete this one character and we'll just leave this character on the screen for now. So to recap, the difference between an object type and an object instance is a little bit abstract and it can be a little bit confusing for people that are new to this kind of thinking. So the important takeaway is that everything in your project panel under object types are collections of objects. So for example, you have a monster here, and all of these monsters that are on the screen, all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them, they all share the same behaviors together, although they do have certain unique properties to them. For example, position, or if we wanted to, we could make a ultra healthy monster here that's going to come and target us, and we can move him far away, so it takes a little while for him to come and attack us. So it's important to note that even though we changed the health of this monster instance, we didn't change the health of any of the other monster instances, nor did we necessarily change the monster object type health. See, now it says multiple health. If we then go and override it, and we said I want all the monsters to have 6 health, then we go back here, then we can see this guy says 6, 6, and then this guy also says 6, so we overrode that. So we do want to be careful with which one we're editing, because if we edit the object itself, or the object instance, whenever I say object, sometimes I mean instance as well, I use them interchangeably. If you edit the object instance itself, then you won't be editing the object type. So you want to make sure that you're editing the object type so that you edit them all, unless you're doing something for a special case. But if that's the case, then you might want to make a new object type just so that you don't get confused. So behaviors, if we click on the character object again, is how we define different functionality for the object type. So I'll click on the player itself so that we're make sure that we're editing the object type and not just the individual player. So an example of a behavior is this 8-direction behavior. This is the behavior that listens to all of the key presses for your arrow keys and allows you to move in multiple directions at the same time. We can define a max speed, an acceleration, so how fast do we speed up, and a deceleration, so how fast do we slow it down. We can also define the number of directions, so if we wanted to limit it to just 4, so you can't move diagonally, you can change that, and then we can see what that looks like. So note how we can't move diagonally anymore, we can just move up, down, left, and right. You can also set the angling method. Don't worry necessarily too much about what that does. If there is something in here that you want to learn more about, the best way that you can do that is by leaving a comment, or if you're impatient like me, you can always go to Google and search for something like, what does set angle mean in construct 3 8 direction? And usually there's really good results, like how to set angle without rotate in the sprite, 8 direction. Here's a manual on the 8 direction behavior, and we can scroll down and read set angle. So this is whether or not the movement should also affect the object's angle. So this one says smooth. We can also just disable that behavior here. Default controls is, yeah, we do want to use the arrow keys, and enabled is whether or not this behavior is turned on or off. So we can disable the keyboard input by unchecking this, and then if we go ahead and make a new instance by pressing Control-C and Control-V to copy and paste, we can enable one and disable the other. So this one's enabled for this character, and this one's disabled. So now our keyboard input is disabled for that character, but our mouse input is still enabled. So the mouse input is a little bit more complicated, and we'll get into that in the next video. So let's put everything back the way that we had it. I'll go ahead and delete this character and put this back to 8 directions, make sure this is enabled, and we're good to go. So next we have bound to layout. This behavior limits where the camera can be on the screen. So we're saying I don't want it to go any further than our current layout. So we can see our layout is defined here by our background. If we move that away, there is this white canvas here that we're denoting as our layout. So our background is on top of it right now, and our camera is limited so it can't go outside of the layout. If it were to go outside the layout, then we'd probably just see a black screen or a gray screen. So we don't want it to be outside of the layout. The next behavior is the scroll to behavior. So this means that our camera stays locked on our player itself. So as we move around, we make sure that the player is always in view, and the character can move around the level, and it looks a lot bigger for a level. So after the behaviors, we have effects. We don't necessarily have to worry about this too much. I'll go over that in a future video on how to add extra special effects to your characters so they look prettier. And finally, we have properties. The most important thing under properties here is animations. So if we go ahead and click on edit, we can actually pull up a paint-like tool where we can edit our characters. So we can go ahead and we can grab our pencil tool here, and we can set our color to something like, I don't know, red. And we can give him more of a red hairstyle if we want to. Or we can make our assets from scratch too. You can remake your character and add frames, but we'll go over animations in a future video. Alright, so I added some red to his hair, made him look pretty cool. I don't know if he dyed his hair like that or if it's just all the monsters, but we can go ahead and we can exit out of this and it should save automatically. And now our character has red hair and it updated. So, like any software, you want to make sure that you save as frequently as humanly possible, because this program does crash every once in a while. It is very rare for it to crash, but if you're working on it for 6 or 7 hours and suddenly it crashes and you lose all your progress, you may be at risk of losing your mind as well. Make sure you hit that save button in the top left here and save it to your local machine or on Dropbox or Google Drive or something like that. So let's say Construct crashes or we needed to leave for the day and come back to it. We can go to recent projects and open up our most recent project, and then everything comes back. He's still got red hair and our monster is still in the right spot. So we went over the general layout of everything in this video. We went over what everything in the player object itself does, as well as different useful hints and tips, including saving and loading your game. In the next video, I'll go over game logic and events with the event sheet, including how you can run events and add additional functionality to your game.